What is up, everybody? Welcome into the Two Stripes podcast, covering all things college football. My name is Colton Denning, and I am your host, coming to you from Boulder, Colorado on Wednesday, July 12th, 2017. I want to thank everybody for tuning into the show today. If you want to check out this show or any of the other old episodes, be sure to go to soundcloud.com/twostripespod. And you can also subscribe to the podcast by going to Apple Podcasts and searching the Two Stripes podcast. So be sure to do that and subscribe and leave a review if you like the show. I'm in a bit of a rush today, so not going to have a long intro to today's episode, but yesterday I had the opportunity to speak with Jeremy Mauss of College Football News and MWC Wire about San Diego State. The last few episodes I've focused more on Power 5 teams, and especially in the SEC. But for this episode, I decided to head on over to the Mountain West. I'm in Mountain West territory anyway, so talk about one of the teams that's under the radar, and a team that is up there with USF, who was one of the episodes a few weeks ago, as one of the best group of 5 teams in the country, in a program that has a legitimate shot at going to a New Year's Six Bowl this year. They have back-to-back seasons of 11 wins. They've won the Mountain West the past 2 years. And despite losing Donnel Pumphrey at running back, San Diego State's still pretty loaded in the run game. They have enough back offensively and on defense. And head coach Rocky Long does such a great job of finding players that fit his style of play, especially along that defense. And when it comes to the running game, San Diego State seems pretty set in their identity right now, and I don't think that that's a thing you can say about a lot of Group of 5 teams, but San Diego State knows who they are and what they want to do, and it's obviously paid off the last 2 seasons and looks to pay off again this year. Jeremy and I spent a lot of time talking about the usual stuff, you know, how they're going to look on the field this year, but there's also a lot going on with SDSU off the field. Their contract at Qualcomm is up in 2018. They're looking for a new stadium, and that hasn't been settled yet. And that's a pretty big deal, and something that I don't think a lot of people are really talking about, and something that could hurt the program if they don't settle it pretty soon. So we got into that, talked a little bit about where the Aztecs are in terms of the Mountain West Conference hierarchy and where they should be and what expectations for the program are now that they've essentially set a baseline for themselves. We've seen SDSU be almost inconsistent in the years prior to Brady Hoke taking over, but after Hoke was able to stabilize the program, Rocky Long's done a really good job, especially lately, with getting that to where I think a lot of people think that they should be year in and year out as a contender in the Mountain West Conference, if not the top team. I thought this was a pretty insightful discussion, and Jeremy definitely knows his stuff when it comes to the Mountain West Conference, so I think you'll enjoy his takes on San Diego State and the conference as a whole, and we might as well get into it. Here's this week's interview. So, to talk everything San Diego State football and the Mountain West Conference, I am joined by one of the contributors for College Football News and MWC Wire, Jeremy Mauss. Jeremy, how you doing today, man?
Doing good, man. We're about, 45 days till everything gets going?
Yeah, we're right there. It is so close, and I can't be more excited, and I'm so glad to talk Mountain West football because it's a conference that I live in and you live in, and maybe the listeners don't get to hear enough about, but it's a good football conference, and like you say, the season's right there, and one of the first games is Colorado State opening up their season in that new stadium against Oregon State, and I'm trying to find tickets to that because I feel like I need to be a part of history. Even though I'm a CU guy, I feel like I need to go to that.
What, support the Pac-12, I guess? I don't know.
Well, hey, I really don't have any beef with CSU. I grew up not liking them, but as I've gotten older, they're really, other than that one game, there's no time that I'm like, screw CSU, I want to see them lose. So like last year when they had a good year, the 10-3 season with McElwain, I'm always okay with CSU being good. As long as it raises the profile of football in the state of Colorado, then, I'm fine with it, as long as they don't beat the Buffs.
I hear that as well because I'm out here in Utah. I went to University of Utah, so at Utah BYU. It's kind of the same thing. And some people question me, or when I used to work for a radio show producing BYU. It was only a BYU show, but I'm a Utah guy. So they'd always think, no matter what I say, oh, you're going to hate BYU because you went to Utah. I'm like, I don't care. It's like when they play each other, yeah, I want Utah to win. If BYU does fine, cool. I did my job to research interviews and stuff, but like I didn't really care if they, because it was better for the job if they play better, win more games. It makes it more fun than a crappy team to cover. So that's what I think about it too, sort of.
Before we talk about San Diego State and the program right now, I want to get your thoughts on the Mountain West as a whole, because maybe a few years ago it kind of seemed like the conference was lagging a little bit, but due to some strong play from San Diego State and Boise State always being Boise State, but you also have Air Force and you have schools like Hawaii and Wyoming who made pretty good hires with Craig Bull and Nick Rolovich, and there's other teams scattered throughout there as well. It seems like the depth in the conference has really sort of gotten stronger. Would you say that is right? And what do you think about the Mountain West as a conference right now as a whole?
I would say like a couple of the years ago, I think last year, out of the few, 4 years ago, during the past 4 years, I should say, let me clarify, they've had multiple teams with 10 wins, which is really good. However, and most of them, I believe, San Diego State plus that Mountain Division, which is much, much better. They did it last year with Boise, Air Force, and San Diego State with 10-plus wins. However, if you don't go to the Fiesta Bowl or Cotton Bowl or do what Western Michigan did or what Boise did in 2014, beating Arizona, nobody really cares. Great, you won 11 wins, but San Diego State will get to them, and people hate me for saying it, you don't lose to South Alabama. If you're a good team, you don't lose to those programs. But, like, they have good teams, but they could have 5 teams win 10 games, but if you're not in a big-time bowl game, who cares? You're beating up on Fresno State or UNLV or Utah State had a down year. They don't really care because New Mexico had 9 wins. Like the Lobos, I've been on their bandwagon for years. I was probably a year too early because the first year they came into the conference, they gave a huge scare to Boise State. I think Boise was up 2 or 3 touchdowns in the first half. They came back and nearly upset Boise a couple years ago when Bob Davie took over. So if you ever watched the Lobos offense, I know Sports on Earth did something recently about the most exciting teams to watch. They were the pick for the Mountain West. They run, I don't even know what to call it because it's just a run option. They brought in the head coach from Sam Houston State a couple years ago to be the OC. They'll run the wishbone. They'll run the diamond. They'll run the veer option, the triple option, jet sweeps. Any running attack you can think of, they'll do it. So if you get a chance to watch the Lobos, watch them play because they'll have runs where guys will go for 30 yards, 40 yards. They've been one of the top rushing teams in the country since Bob Davie took over, which is weird because Bob Davie, defensive coach at Notre Dame, and then took a decade off at ESPN. But if you get a chance to watch them, they're not, I predict them maybe to win 6 games, but they're just so unique. They're interesting to watch. But overall, I think for the Mountain West or even the American, if even in the MAC and all these other conferences, if you're not in a New Year's Six bowl game, it doesn't matter if you have teams that go 11-1 or 12-1, but you don't go to the big game. Who cares? That's my opinion from being where I live. Pac-12 everywhere. It's probably similar with you a little bit in Colorado with the Buffs there, but overall it is getting better. Like you'll hear this year, Josh Allen, the quarterbacks, they have 3 quarterbacks that are rival probably almost any conference overall for depth because Josh Allen's talking about a top 10 pick this year. You got Brett Rippon, nephew of Mark Rippon from the Redskins, Super Bowl MVP. He did pretty well. And even Nick Stevens, he was the most efficient quarterback or quarterback rating November on last year. And that doesn't include like Aaron Worthman at Air Force, so he's not a throwing guy, but he could lead that Falcons attack very efficiently. He took over last year halfway through. So quarterback play will be big this year and receiving group, just like last year was a running back depth with Brian Hill, Donnel Pumphrey, and Jeremy McNichols. This year's the quarterbacks. And there's names to know, but it's not that it's harder to find, but they play later. You know how it is. They play those 8 o'clock games out on the West Coast, and they don't like it when they're playing 8:30 on ESPN. Boise's playing San Diego State or Wyoming, CSU, or whatever. And then San Diego State is on CBS Sports Network a lot, which distribution's not as highly out there compared to like ESPNU or ESPN2. So a little bit of a visibility issue, especially West Coast. You're going to watch the Pac-12 because they're on at the same time for the most part. Maybe a couple Big 12 games here or there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and maybe more so, you know, rather than looking at it at a conference like you're saying that hasn't had a team like Western Michigan kind of bust through. Boise State hasn't done that for a couple of seasons, but you mentioned New Mexico. They have 2 guys go over 1,000 yards rushing last year, and then 2 more go over 600, so that's a fun team. You mentioned Josh Allen in Wyoming. Nevada with Jay Norvell and former Alabama quarterback David Cornwell. Who knows what they will be, but I think that's intriguing. So even and Arian Worthman as well with Air Force. So even if there's not, you know, those top-level teams, and then we talked about CSU earlier, who looks primed for a very good season. There's a lot of, I think, interesting stuff going on in the Mountain West, and it definitely seems less maybe bland is the right word than it has been before.
Yeah, they're back to more of a passing attack because while Brett Rippon's been there a couple of years, it's been running the past couple of seasons. Like I said, Brian Hill, McNichols, all those guys. Wyoming, they did lose Tanner Gentry, but Josh Allen, he can. I'm questioning how good they'll be. I think they'll take a step back, but he's going to have the name out there because NFL stuff, so that'll get people to watch the conference. More prominent people like Paul Meyerberg just did a piece from USA Today about Wyoming out there. I think he went a couple months ago, but finally put his piece up there. It's just a uniqueness of offense, like you said, at Nevada. I don't know if it's going to be Ganji or Cornwell. Nevada does lose James Butler, but they have Matt Mumme there. Timmy Chang, former Hawaii quarterback, is on that staff. Norvell put so many wide receivers in the NFL at his time in the Big 12. And then look at San Diego State. Rocky Long has a defense that'll just crush anybody. And yeah, they lose Donnel Pumphrey. Rashard Penny also had 1,000 yards last year, which is nearly as efficient as Pumphrey on a per carry basis. And even Hawaii, they have a St. Just running the ball. They finally have a quarterback in Drew Brown. They haven't had a healthy quarterback in years, or even a quarterback established as this is a starter. So the West Division's garbage. We know that's not very good, but they finished last year strong. They beat Middle Tennessee State in the bowl game, who has Brent Stock, still one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He was kind of hurt, I believe, when he came into that game, recovering from an injury. They went 7-7. They'll probably get second in the division. Still might go 7-7 again, but they have guys back on that team where they haven't had a quarterback established in a while. Nevada will take a while. People love Armani Rogers at UNLV. He hasn't started the game, but we'll see. Chase and Virgil at Fresno. You got Jeff Tedford as a coach who I can't say how many very skepticals I am because I'm very skeptical because
agreed.
People have heard me talk about this. His bonus structure is ridiculous, and he just gets way too much money for what he's doing. For having coached him forever, and he's overrated as a quarterback guru.
Yeah, I would completely agree. But getting to the topic of this episode and the team that's been the class of the Mountain West the past 2 seasons, San Diego State. 2 straight Mountain West Conference titles, and it's tough to say that any team should win 11 games each year, but is being the premier team in that conference kind of where they should be, given what we've seen the past 2 years? Because it feels like, they had moments with Brady Hoke, but throughout most of their history, it's been a very inconsistent program, and it kind of feels like, hey, this is where they should be. Maybe not 11 wins every year, but at the top of the Mountain West.
They finally got good when they brought Brady Hoke in. Then he left after Michigan and everywhere else he's been wandering off the past while. You would think if Southern California, you can get UCLA's 4th, 5th, or 6th option, USC's option. You know what I mean? Like, it's like in TCU. You're in Texas. You can get a guy who's 2 or 3 stars, but you can get the leftovers after Texas, after OU, after Texas A&M, after maybe LSU or Oklahoma State even. They could get talent in there. You think San Diego State in a similar area, but Qualcomm's a dump. You could have 45,000 people there and it'll still feel empty because it holds, 660 or 70,000 fans. And they're finally got the recruiting going with Hoke. They had Ryan Lindley, the quarterback, a couple years ago, get things going. They switched a bit offensively a little bit. They brought in Rocky Long, who came over from New Mexico, who said he couldn't do anything else as the head coach. And not necessarily true, but Michael Oxley was a dumpster fire there and killing the program. But at San Diego State, they're still not going to get the top guys, but I'm not saying they find gems like Pumphrey because, he's a smaller guy, so he's not going to go to UCLA or wherever I think he's from Las Vegas or something. They miss out. He's not going to the bigger schools because, he's 5'10", 180. Well, we'll bring that in. Hopefully give him some weight. Maybe he'll grow an inch or two, which Pumphrey really did. And he's still 5, like Emmitt Smith size, 5'10", maybe 200. But they find ways to do it. But with Rocky Long, the defense, the 3-3-5 is so unique. You can move athletes like wide receivers or running backs, put them in DB or linebacker. More athletic guys out there when you have an extra linebacker who can play safety as well. So they can disguise a lot of coverages on there. They do that quarter coverage type scheme. That's where there's a few concerns with guys for the NFL draft. Like, well, can he really play a lockdown corner when he always has help? Or he only has to cover 25% of his area instead of 50 to 80%. So there's always that concern, but it's college. Who cares? This is the college game we're talking about. They can make plays and stop teams offensively for what they do. And they got just good enough where guys like, well, I want to stay home. Who doesn't want to go to San Diego? Come on. I don't care. School or college, if you're good enough and you're not getting offers from the top schools around and you're not their number one choice, why not go there? And you don't have to be the 5-star guy who wants to make this big impression, but say your choices are Texas Tech or Indiana or Cal or Washington State, why not go to San Diego State?
Should the expectation for San Diego State be at least to be one of the top group of 5 teams each year? And you mentioned maybe the reason that the conference doesn't get the respect that maybe other group of 5 conferences do is they haven't broken in and had one of those Western Michigan seasons that we saw last year. Is that the next step for San Diego State, is to have one of those seasons and to generate a little bit more national respect?
It is, because you got to get the wins too, because look at Houston, they beat Oklahoma. So you get wins like that, or Boise State beating Oregon, or Boise State beating Ole Miss down in the Georgia Dome. It's games like that where San Diego State doesn't have, because like I said, and they get mad at me, if you're a good program, you don't lose to South Alabama. They didn't go to a bowl game. Boise State doesn't lose to teams like that. If you're a good team, like when Northern Illinois is running off victories in the MAC, they don't lose to bad teams. San Diego State has lost to bad teams, and they don't have marquee victories either. This is the year there's that chance. Arizona State's not great, but that could be a winnable game, I think. Hosting Stanford is their big deal, because even though David Shaw has them running, they're probably going to be better next year than this year. They might be. I'd give a coin flip chance to win that game at home, but that's what they have to do. They don't have the marquee victories. They don't have a big win. That's the problem with San Diego State. The West Division is pretty bad, so they can roll through that with fairly ease, but they do get Boise this year, which is tough. They do get New Mexico, which will be difficult from the other division just because of what they do, but I think that is the expectation.
Before we get into the 2017 season and what they bring back and who they lose, I want to talk a little bit about the stadium issue, because this seems like something that's a really huge deal that maybe nobody outside of the Mountain West is talking about. So San Diego State's contract with Qualcomm is up in 2018, and like you said, that place is awful. It's atrocious. It's the worst stadium that I've ever been to, and the cost of playing there might not be feasible for the university after that contract is up if they were to still try to play in that building and on that land. And the university cut off talks for a joint use MLS college football stadium a couple months ago, and when asked about if there should be concerns about the future of the football program, San Diego State's athletic director, J.D. Wicker, said, quote, "To a certain extent, sure," end quote. And that's not good. Just reading that really makes me worried, and something that shouldn't be happening for a program that's won 11 games in back-to-back seasons. So what's the deal with the Aztecs stadium situation, and do you expect this to be resolved anytime soon?
It's hard to keep track. There's all that Soccer City stuff where they want to put on the ballot, they have this deal in place, but then you'll see emails released or PDFs about, we're doing this to get our best deal, who's lying, who's not lying. It seems like both sides are not, I don't know if they're withholding information or they're just kind of twisting the truth about what could be done or what could not be done. I figured when I first heard, share a stadium with MLS team, or here's the thing, it's still a very, very, very potential MLS team. It's not a team that's even for sure. And so that's the problem with it as well. Well, that'd probably be a good soccer town. Sure, why not? Who cares? Whatever. It might be or might not be. But for when I first started the deal, it's the share stadium, which means sharing cost. It'd be about 30,000 seats, which that's good enough. Unless you start filling that every single week, every single year for 4 to 5 years, then expand it. That's a thing as well. But 30,000 is fine, because look at Qualcomm's attendance the past couple of years. It's been maybe 30 at best. The only reason they get huge games is when they have those firework or flyover games. They'll have that when they play the FCS team. There's some specific name for it, but they'll bring 50,000. But even then, that's still 20,000 short of a sellout. I don't know what the plan is. I know the Soccer City thing was voted down, but they do have options to play in Petco. I believe Petco is through, I know it's changed recently what they said, but I think they're good through 2019 if they need to. Because the queue is supposed to be torn down reasonably soon, within 2 years. They have next 2018 for sure. That's last guaranteed year at Qualcomm. 2019, Petco's the Padres, yeah, you can play there. But beyond there, yeah, you can play there, but you have to wait till our season's over. So if they make the playoffs, you can't work around that. You can work around if they're not going to make the playoffs, maybe front load your schedule, but that's a terrible situation for everybody, because if they make the playoffs, what are they going to do? Kick you out? Where are you going to play? You go to the Rose Bowl on an off weekend when UCLA's not playing, go to the Coliseum, go to Carson City where was at Home Depot, whatever, where the Rams are playing now, where I don't go to some junior college. I don't know what the plan is. And so there's still nothing. I've heard of no great deal outside of, I've heard no great deal. There's a Mission Viejo thing. They want land there, but honestly, it's just a complete mess, and it's hard to keep track. That's the latest I've kind of heard. Vote got shot down for Soccer City. They want to put it back on the ballot again, or maybe revote, or I don't know if it's a ballot initiative or revote, but they're confident they'll get it back in there. But when this public information has been coming out saying Soccer City wants to kind of fleece SDSU for this extra money that's not there, like inflating the land value because what potentially could be there, or, oh, here's the land, but we're going to put a soccer academy or some dorm style thing on property. Like, wait a minute, and then increases the value where you're paying this much more. It's like, wait a second, what's going to happen? So I would recommend just read the San Diego Union Tribune because they're all over it. I've looked into it. Hopefully this is making sense. I just know it's at a crossroads and there's no definitive plan on either side. Really, Soccer City thinks it's going to happen, but it already got shut down by city council once.
Big story on the field this year is losing NCAA's all-time leading rusher Donnel Pumphrey, but SDSU also loses 4 of their starting offensive linemen from last season, and not a lot of the linemen playing this year have a lot of game experience. Do you think heading into the season that this is the biggest question mark offensively, at least?
Not really, because like I said before, they have Rashard Penny back. He had 1,000 yards last year, and they also, behind him, they went pretty deep at running game despite having Pumphrey, whatever passing raw range regular season record. They still have Juwan Washington, who averaged 8 yards a carry and 440 yards. But again, 2,000 yards is different compared to 400 yards. Penny had 1,000 yards, I believe, the past 2 years. I know last year for sure he just passed 1,000. He actually ran better, like I said before, ran better than Pumphrey, 7.5 yards per carry, 10 yards after he was hit in the backfield or wherever he got hit. He got 10 yards after contact, essentially. I believe that stat's right. Maybe I'm wrong. It says that here, so I'm going to go with it, what I'm reading. But they do lose Nico Saragusa to the Ravens, NFL at least. I believe the Ravens, but that's a big deal. The offensive line, obviously, if you're listening to this, you should know that if you have a great offensive line, you can make a mediocre running back look really good. They lose their 4 starters from last year and 2 all-conference Mountain West players and the All-American, like I said, Nico Saragusa. And they only returned the right guard and Antonio Rosales back there, and he had 14 starts. After that, minimal game experience, like he said. It's going to be an issue. I think Penny and Washington will be fine in getting done what we know we can do, what we've seen them do running the ball, but if that offensive line craps bad or something, that'll be an issue. But they have guys like Ryan. Look at this offensive line. Ryan Pope, 6'7", 320. Tyler Romer, 6'7", 305. They have 4 guys at 6'7". That's ridiculous just on their depth chart overall. And so they have big guys over 310, 340 pounds. They have guys, what's it here, 6'6", 345. They have big guys there, but we just got to see how they play. That's an issue. And it's going to be a question mark on the team because they do return Christian Chapman, a quarterback, who's, in my opinion, just okay. And receiving core has always been an issue. They have Michael Holder back, but I would say the running game's fine, but just based on experience. But losing 4 starters, that's going to take a step back one way or another. Let's say this, they're not going to be better than last year running the ball, and it's hard to do even if they had Pumphrey and a full offensive line back.
That's definitely fair to say, and Penny will be a lot of fun to finally watch in that feature role. And like you said, Juwan Washington was explosive in the touches that he got, and those two are an excellent return duo as well, so it'll be fun to watch them on special teams. But let's get into Christian Chapman. You said you wanted to talk about him when we were tweeting about this earlier, and he heads into his junior season. He probably took a few too many sacks last season, but he feels like a solid game-managing quarterback. But now with a new offensive line and losing Pumphrey, who was also second on the team in receiving targets last season, what's the expectation for him this season, and how much does he really need to step up to help this offense out? Because like you're saying, the run game should to an extent be fine, but they're not going to be able to count on it like they did last year, it seems like.
Correct. It may take a few games, but we'll see. I've always said for the past couple of years, because there's a known hatred for Maxwell Smith, the previous quarterback. They've had an above average passing game. Well, and Chapman's not bad. Part of it is he's not asked to do a lot because give the ball to Pumphrey. When you have a guy rushing for 2,000 yards, that's your offense. Handoff, handoff, handoff. He threw okay, 61%. 61% is not bad, but people get mad at me for saying like, oh, he's a good quarterback. He's great. I'm like, no, he's not great. Yeah, 20 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, but who's going to catch the ball? They're not. If I said this last year and I'll say it again, basically this can go towards any quarterback, but doubly so for Christian Chapman. They had that game last year versus Wyoming in the regular season. They were stuck at their own 1 or 2 yard line. I would give any quarterback basically no chance to go down the field. Fourth quarter, 90 seconds left to get a touchdown. That's ridiculous. Nobody does that. He helped lead them down the field to do that, so I give him credit for that, but I would give him less. I'd put him at the back of the line to do that, to achieve that type of feat. He's not a quarterback who it's 3rd and 18, he's going to get you a 20-yard strike to the tight end or to the wide receiver or across the middle or whatever play they're going to do, an out pattern. He's not the guy he's not going to the NFL. He's an okay college quarterback where he does his job, does it pretty well, but he's not an above average or elite quarterback. All these Aztec fans get at me and say, "Oh, what do you mean? He's great. He's good." I'm like, "No, he's not good. He gets the job done." I compared him and Max Smith to Trent Dilfer winning the Super Bowl for the Ravens. He's not the reason they won, but he's a big reason why they didn't lose these games because he didn't turn it over very much. He made the plays he's asked to make. He's not asked to throw for 300 yards per game. That may change a little bit this year, but until this offense proves it, I'm going to say the quarterback's still second fiddle to the running back or running game. Completing 61% of your passes, yes, that's good. That's efficient. That's solid. But if you're going to tell me, is Chapman going to win you a game? I'm going to say no. He's not going to be a guy who could go 28 for 35, 4 touchdowns, and 360 yards. That's not him. And it's not the Aztec offense anyway. So you could put Brett Ripp in his offense, and they would still hand the ball off to Donnel Pumphrey last year or Rashard Penny this year.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel like they're going to be able to have some of those games they had last year, like the one against Fresno where he only completed 7 of 12 passes, or against, you looking at it right now, Wyoming, where he completed 6 of 13 with an interception, that he's going to be asked maybe to do a little bit more. And part of that as well is in the receiving core. And Michael Holder is a guy that I like who's a senior this year. But after him, a lot of their options are pretty unproven. What do you think about San Diego State's wide receiver group, and who do you think steps up to kind of help Michael Holder out?
Yes, you're right. It's kind of the same thing, like with Pumphrey being the number 2 guy last year. And think about it. Holder only had 27 receptions last year. So it's not like he was tearing it up as the number 1 guy. Him and Pumphrey had the same amount. I think David Wells, who's on the Mackey Award watch list for tight ends, he's going to be a guy that could step up. He was right there last year with Holder. And then I think you can make this the transitive property with Penny had 15 to maybe 20 catches, 25 catches as he's the main guy. Maybe he'll help out a little bit, but then who's going to, again, it snowballs. Who's going to take his reception in the backfield? Is it Juwan Washington? I think it's going to be like David Wells will have a big year. He's going to be one of the big targets. And I guess you got to go down a little bit to like a senior in Quest Truxton, who he only had 11 receptions last year, but 3 touchdowns, and he's kind of one of their deep threats a little bit, almost 15 yards per catch. Holder is more of an extreme deep threat of 20-plus yards per catch, but I can see him because you got upperclassmen too when you go down the depth chart for a couple of these positions. But then after Truxton, you have maybe Darrell Richardson, another tight end to back up, but you have like Parker Houston, tight end. I would be more confident if, say, these guys going down the depth chart were juniors or seniors, but after like Truxton, it's all sophomores or redshirt freshmen. And so that's an issue. They're not here. Plus, a good thing going for them, they're not going to go 4 wide very often. They'll go single tight, double tight end set, 2 running backs. So most of their plays will probably have maybe 2 wide receivers at most. So you're going to see Holder and Truxton as the top 2 wide receivers. Maybe have David Wells kind of do like the tight end split out a little bit. But they're not going to go 3 or 4 wide where they have to go 7 guys deep. They're going to typically have 2 receivers and a tight end and 2 backs every play. So the depth, they don't need depth, but also they don't have the depth either after Truxton and, I don't know, maybe Darrell Richardson, tight end, does something special. I don't know.
So even if that offense does end up taking a step back, there's always that defense. They ranked 24th in S&P Plus last year, and they've had such a successful run under Rocky Long. What about his style of play in that 3-3-5 makes them so successful? Because you see a lot of teams, not a lot of teams, but the teams that do utilize the 3-3-5, historically, the first or second year it'll give teams fits, and then coordinators will figure it out. But it seems like that hasn't been the case in the Mountain West.
That's true. He's also been in the Mountain West forever, back with New Mexico. And so he's had this defense forever. And part of what they do, if you look at like TCU, Gary Patterson runs this defense. And a lot of other teams are picking this up as well, the 3-3-5, because while you have 5 defensive backs, there's guys one of the guys is essentially like a linebacker, essentially. He's big enough to play in the running game, but also quick enough to guard next receiver, cover the middle on tight ends coming across. And then also they don't really play man-to-man coverage all that much. It's not a zone, but it's kind of like I said at the beginning, you play like a quarter coverage. So if you're a defensive back or a cornerback specifically, you're going to cover your guy, but if he gets behind you, that's fine. You have another secondary mate back there, like your safety, free safety or strong safety back there. They're responsible for covering the field. It's a lot of zone coverages too. And when you have 5 guys with that speed back there, it helps a lot going up against teams that pass the ball well. Like when they played Cal last year with Davis Webb, Webb got a lot of yardages on there, but there's interceptions, pass knockdowns, which they're very good at doing. And then also when you have this front six, you can go 3-4, 4-3, you can go 4-2. You can always sort of mix up what you have. So it's never, you could have your base defense, but have 4 defensive linemen one time, 3 defensive linemen, just switch it up. It's always the same play defensively. So it looks different, but it's, I think that makes sense where you could have a front, I should say, like a different front, but your defenders know it's the same play every time, but you just look different to make the quarterback think, the center think, maybe the running back think is blocking assignment. That's kind of what it is. You can disguise a lot and get creative with an extra athlete on the field.
What do you think the strength of this defense will be in 2017?
I would say it's usually the secondary. I think it could be a secondary again, perhaps, because maybe not. Parker Baldwin's probably the best defender. He's that Aztec position, so kind of like that kind of rover guy. He'll take more of a safety type, not a cornerback. He's really good. They lose Calvin Munson, which is a big deal in the linebacking core. I think the defensive line has the most depth, despite losing guys like Alex Barrett and Kyle Kelly. They have the most depth back because if you look at the games played, they rotate so many guys in there. They'll have 3 guys back on the defensive line who've played 14 games last year. And then if you go to the linebacking group, which is probably just as deep, but they lost probably better players, I would say, because Munson's a pretty big deal. They return, 5 guys here who had 10 or more games played last year. So they have experience. In the secondary is extremely deep. I guess I would say defensive line probably be better, but the secondary has so much experience, it's going to be nearly as good because DeMonte Casey, very good. He's in the NFL now. They lose like Malik Smith is, I think he's in the NFL as well, doing some good things there. They have all these guys who have pass breakups, interceptions. Like losing Casey is a big deal. He had 7 picks and 8 pass breakups. So they have the depth there, but I think overall I guess I would go defensive line just because they bring those 3 main guys back, like the tackles and defensive ends back who are returning who played last year, like Sergio Phillips and Dakota Turner. But I don't think the defense is really going to take a step back, so it's kind of hard for me to say, this definitely linebacker or defensive line's their best unit. It's going to be good regardless, but I think defensive line is going to be the best, and secondary just has a lot to make up with the amount of production they're losing from interception and pass breakups from like guys like Casey and Smith.
Yeah, speaking of Casey and Smith, they lose them in the secondary, and then you brought up Alex Barnett and Kyle Kelly on the line as well. Do you think that even though they've had some depth there, and they should be able to play a nice rotation on not only the defensive line but in the secondary as well, do you think it'll take a little time for some of those newer guys to gel in to that defense, especially given that they're playing Arizona State, who should at least have a good offense, and then Stanford in the first 3 weeks of the season, and then by the time conference play rolls around, we'll start to see a pretty typical San Diego State defense? Or do you think that just right from the get-go, this is going to be what we're used to seeing from Rocky Long's defense?
I think it'll be getting used to the names of who's going to step up and be replaced, like you said, Barrett, Kelly, Munson, all those guys. But like I said, like the amount of games experience they played, these guys aren't like they've only played 1 or 2 games. These guys have double-digit returning talent who played in 11 games, 12 games, 13-plus games last year. I just think it's learning who's going to be the main guy, but they're still going to be – I'm not going to be overconfident. Say, they're fine just because they lose 6 starters on defense. That's a big loss. It's still going to take a week or 2, which they don't really have too much time for because, like you said, they have Arizona State. Offense is pretty good. They get UC Davis week 1, which obviously easy victory for them. That'll get things straightened out, but I don't think there's going to be too much of a learning curve or getting to the typical San Diego State defense. But you'll probably see some hiccups with Arizona State and probably Stanford, who, actually, I think they can win, but Stanford's always their main thing is running the ball and have a solid quarterback to throw it downfield a little bit. But it will take some time, but I'm pretty confident it'll be good enough the first month of the season.
Last few, and then we'll get you out of here. We talked about, to start the show, the Mountain West, adding some depth and getting better. Do you think heading into this season that SDSU, until proven otherwise, is still the team to beat in the conference?
My pick is Colorado State to win the conference. People are surprised I say that. I would say the San Diego State clear front runner to win the division and go to the conference title game because the West is garbage, and I'll admit that. It's fine. Hawaii's okay, but everybody else is pretty bad. I predicted Aztecs. I do predict San Diego State, which is stupid probably, to go 12-0. It hinges on that Stanford game, which is a big deal. They will have some trouble versus like New Mexico. They host Boise for the first time in a couple years at that cross-division game, but I think they could go undefeated. I know it's always dumb to say undefeated because, you're home or whatever, but I think track record speaks for itself. And one of these days, they got to beat these really good teams. I don't count Cal as a really good team. They're okay, but they're not Stanford, of course. But I would say they're going to win the division, go to the title game. I think CSU's better because the first half last year, CSU wasn't very good. They had quarterback issues. Nick Stevens played terrible versus Colorado. You remember that game. He got benched and I think they pulled the trigger too quickly on him. They brought in Fountain Bada, whatever. Colin Hill comes in, tears his knee versus Utah State. Cold off the bench on 3rd and long. Nick Stevens leads him down to points to beat Utah State. Second half of the year, they were, I can look at Bill C's numbers, they were a top 10 team, and it's opponent adjusted as well for strength of schedule. So it's not just because they're beating these teams, like crushing San Diego State scored 60 points on them last year. It's not because of that. They were playing good and doing well. They nearly beat Boise State. That's their big thing. They've never beaten them in the conference. But week 6 or 7 on last year, whatever Marty English did defensively worked well. They slowed teams down. They played much better outside of the Idaho game, which playing on that stupid ice rink would hurt anybody. And they got out to a quick lead, and that was an exciting game if you watched the second half on. But I'm going off of the Rams, how they played the second half of last year to continue that. I think Nick Stevens, like I said, got the hook too early last year because look, he was an all-conference quarterback the year before. And he's just as good. I tell people, like, you'll hear Brett Rippon and Josh Allen all year. Nick Stevens is as good or better than those guys statistically. And that's different from saying Josh Allen being a top 5 quarterback in the draft because Rippon will get the first team honors because of stats and playing for Boise State. But I'm going to go CSU as a team I think will win the conference. They won't beat Alabama, but I think they may scare them a little bit for half the game, maybe, if that's going down to Tuscaloosa. But I think it'll be a Rams Aztec title game, but I think the Rams are going to win. And if the Rams are 13-1, depending what South Florida does, but because they're the other team that's probably going to be the top spot, their schedule's trash. They don't play anybody good. And the American's good, don't get me wrong, but non-conference, I know one of the games is San Jose State, whatever, but they don't have like a big win. Like beating Stanford would be that big win because Stanford probably will finish second in the Pac-12 North, most likely. If you beat Stanford, beat a pretty good Arizona State team, you might go 6-6, good enough bowl team at least. I'm mixing these two teams up here. I apologize because they have a couple Alabama teams are on the conference schedule, Fresno and CSU. But I mean, to say if CSU loses to Alabama going to South Florida, like what's better? You're 13-0 in the American, but your only losses to Alabama, and you're 13-1 or whatever title game, whatever. I don't know how many games you play, 13, 14, 15 nowadays, but undefeated. I think that could trump beating over against undefeated team like South Florida, because last year, if you remember, Boise State had one loss and was ahead of undefeated Western Michigan. So there's precedent. Had Boise not lost to Air Force end of the year and then gone on to win the title game, they would have been in over an undefeated Western Michigan to the Cotton Bowl playing Wisconsin. So we've seen that. And so I'm thinking, like, my pick, I would say CSU is my team. I think they're my number one team to go to the Group of 5 for a playoff game or a New Year's 6 game, even with a loss to Alabama. Even if San Diego State goes undefeated, but I think the Rams could beat them again because they probably host, I'm assuming. I don't know. Maybe, but that's kind of my workaround to weave every bit of college football into this mix here.
I'm glad you brought up one of those New Year's 6 bowls because both of those teams are going to have a shot. If CSU is able to beat CU, which I think is a possibility given that CU's defense is almost starting from scratch, especially in the secondary and with a new defensive coordinator. And if San Diego State is able to beat Arizona State, it seems like if both of those teams run through their schedule that they will meet up in that conference title game and have a shot at going to that New Year's Day 6, depending on, like you're saying, what South Florida does. So last one for you here. If San Diego State does beat Arizona State, it seems like the New Year's Day 6 Bowl is on the table. Should that be the expectation for 2017? And what do you think a fair expectation for 2017 San Diego State is?
San Diego State fans think they deserve the respect Boise State has, which they do not. Because go back to 2004, undefeated, going to Louisville in the Liberty Bowl, beating Oklahoma, playing TCU in a big-time bowl game. Like I said, all these games, beating Arizona. They think they deserve that. It's like when Utah State fans a couple years ago at Chucky Keaton. They're always on the verge of being very close. They almost beat Wisconsin that year a couple years ago. Had they beat Wisconsin and not miss that field goal and do a smart play to get 5 more yards up the middle instead of passing deep, they would have been in the Orange Bowl over Northern Illinois to get crushed by Florida State a couple years ago. Aztec fans think they get it. Well, they think this disrespect on my part, but I'll go back to the beginning, and they hate it. Don't lose to South Alabama or teams that don't go to bowl games from the Sun Belt. If you want to get the respect, you do not lose to those type of teams. I don't care if you're 6-6 in this conference, you shouldn't lose to a Sun Belt team that doesn't have a winning record. I would say their expectation is to get a realistic expectation at this point is to get to the conference title game because the West Division is not very good. Hawaii's getting better. Nevada, they don't have James Butler now. He transferred, so that's an issue. Everybody has a new coach outside of UNLV, and they're still learning under Tony Sanchez, a new quarterback with Armani Rogers. San Jose is a new coach. Fresno has a new coach. All these new coaches in the conference, Nevada. That's our expectation this year. And probably going forward, it should be contend for winning the conference or division title. That's where it should be realistically, but Aztec fans say they should win the conference, which, heck, you've won it twice in a row. Why shouldn't you get back and win it again? Saying your expectations in New Year's Six game, like expectation, not goal, but expectation, that's different. As a goal, yes, their goal should be, and I would say it's reasonably realistic to go to the New Year's Six game because if they lose to just Stanford but win the conference and they beat a double-digit Boise, double-digit CSU team in the title game, whichever it may be, because it could be Boise there perhaps, that still might trump an undefeated South Florida team. And so I would say their goal is a New Year's Six game, but expectation should be winning the division and probably winning the conference. I would say, for me, it's winning the division, but I think fans would say winning the conference is their expectation, but their ultimate goal and realistic goal is going to a big-time bowl game for the first time ever.
Well, if you want to follow anything on San Diego State's upcoming season or anything happening in the Mountain West Conference, I would highly recommend that you follow Jeremy Mauss on Twitter at Jeremy Mauss. That is Jeremy, M-A-U-S-S. Also head over to collegefootballnews.com and go to the Mountain West Conference Wire and follow them on Twitter at MWC Wire. And keep up with all of Jeremy's analysis on the conference and his ongoing rivalry with San Diego State fans, it seems like. But Jeremy, thanks for joining the show, man. I'm glad we got some Mountain West talk in here. It's been lacking, so I very much appreciate it.
No problem. It's great stuff, man.
San Diego State fans, please make sure to send all of your hate tweets to Jeremy Mauss. Big thanks to Jeremy, though, for joining the show. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at Jeremy Mauss and follow the Mountain West Conference Wire at MWC Wire to keep up with everything that's going on in what should be a really fun conference this year. We talked a little bit about it on the show, but almost every team, I think, has something intriguing about them, and there's a lot of good coaches in that league right now, which makes it fun to watch if you're a Power 5 fan and maybe your program is kind of spinning its wheels right now. There are some good coaches that are going to make some noise here in a couple of seasons, so it's fun to see the unique offenses like the one Bob Davie runs at New Mexico and also see some rising names in the coaching profession in that conference to match up with what Troy Calhoun does at Air Force, what Boise State does year in and year out, San Diego State now, and then you have a team like CSU who is on the rise. I think Jeremy made a really interesting pick with CSU to win the conference. They played so well to close out last season after starting really poorly, and Mike Bobo is a fantastic head coach, and they definitely have a legitimate shot at winning this season, but I think if I had to pick one, I would still go with San Diego State. I think the running game and the defense may take a couple weeks to gel with some new players there, but once the offensive line gets its feet under it, I think this will be your typical San Diego State team that likes to run the ball. But Christian Chapman is going to have to carry a little bit of a bigger role in that offense this year, and I don't think it's impossible to say that he can do that. I'm not sure, like Jeremy said, that he's a guy that you're going to trust throwing the ball 35 times a game, but I think that he can manage an offense and do just enough, especially if they get somebody to step up with Michael Holder at receiver. And then defensively, it's going to be what you expect from a San Diego State team, and they'll have the best defense in the conference and probably a top 30 defense nationally again. And if they do, I don't see them having a chance at beating Stanford. I think that they'll get pushed around by them, but they have a legitimate shot at beating Arizona State. Arizona State wasn't very good last year. I don't think they're going to be very good this year. They should be able to pile up some yardage on them. It's just a matter of will they be able to get enough stops on defense, and I think that the possibility is very real that San Diego State heads into the Mountain West title game with only one loss to Stanford and a shot at that Group of 5 spot in the New Year's Six Bowl. That's going to wrap up today's show, though. Want to thank everybody for listening. Want to thank Jeremy again for joining the show. And a big thank you to everybody that tuned in for the first time. You can find the podcast over at soundcloud.com/twostripespod and on Apple Podcasts as well by searching the Two Stripes Podcast. And be sure to subscribe and leave a review. And if you have any feedback about the podcast, follow me on Twitter at Dubsco. Send me a tweet. Tell me what you like, don't like about it. And interact with me and the show there. That's it for this week's episode. I will be back next week. But until then, my name is Colton Denning, and this is the Two Stripes Podcast.